Hello everyone, I'm so glad you're here. Tonight, I'm here to help you unwind, slow down, and let your thoughts drift gently into sleep. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and I'm honored to be part of that quiet moment in your evening. So before we begin, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. Now, get comfortable, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The Triangle in the Sky. Back in August of 2023, my wife and I were staying at an Airbnb tucked away in Hatch, Utah. It was a quiet little town, perched at a high enough elevation that air conditioning wasn't necessary, which, at the time, seemed like a quaint detail. The temperatures were comfortable, the air was fresh, and the open skies stretched endlessly overhead. It was the kind of place where you could feel time slowing down, where the modern world's distractions fell away, leaving only the stillness of the moment. This detail about the open windows and mild weather would come to feel far more significant later, though we couldn't have guessed it at the time. On our first night, with no light pollution and no clouds to speak of, the stars unfurled across the heavens in a breathtaking display. We stepped outside to take it all in, armed with my GoPro and my phone, eager to capture even a fraction of that beauty. I set up the camera to try for some long exposure shots while we simply stood together, gazing upward in awe. It was a perfect, peaceful night, or at least it started out that way. My wife was the first to notice something unusual. She nudged me and pointed to a small light moving across the sky. At first we assumed it was a satellite, a mundane but still delightful sight. Yet, as we watched, the single light multiplied, splitting into 3 distinct points that arranged themselves into a perfect triangle. Intrigued, we kept watching as the formation expanded, with more lights appearing at the edges, until there were 7 lights arranged into a much larger triangular pattern. It was mesmerizing and unsettling all at once. But what truly sent chills down my spine was the way the sky inside that triangle seemed different. It didn't shimmer or shift like a normal disturbance would. Instead, the stars within the triangle froze, locking into a static image while the rest of the sky continued to move naturally. The effect was eerily similar to a scene from the Predator movies, where the alien's cloaking technology warps and distorts the view behind it. This patch of frozen sky drifted across the heavens, distinct and separate from everything around it. The entire encounter lasted only a few minutes, but it felt timeless. Eventually, the triangle either shrank into nothing or shot upwards so quickly that it became invisible to the naked eye. As we stood there, dumbfounded, we realized something else had changed, something subtler but no less chilling. The night had fallen eerily silent. No crickets, no rustling breeze, not even the distant hoot of an owl. It was as if nature itself had paused to watch the anomaly with us. Feeling a deep sense of unease, we decided to call it a night and headed inside. We tried to laugh it off, chalking it up to just another strange, wonderful part of nature's mysteries. Yet a heavy silence settled over us, pressing down in a way that laughter couldn't lift. That night, as we prepared for bed, I remembered a new setting on my GoPro that allowed for even longer exposures. Eager to make the most of the clear skies, I ventured back onto the porch alone. That's when I heard it. A whistle, low and eerie, drifting through the air. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. I'm not a superstitious man, but I've heard the stories about answering whistles in the night, about inviting something unknowable into your presence. I didn't respond. I simply stood there, heart pounding, listening. A second whistle sounded, closer this time, and that was enough for me. I hurried back inside without looking back, locking the door behind me. We tried to shake it off. We laughed nervously at ourselves, joked about old ghost stories and desert spirits. Yet, even as we climbed into bed, the open windows offering some relief from the still, heavy air, I couldn't quite settle. Sleep eventually found us, but only lightly. An hour or so later, my wife shook me awake, her eyes wide and fearful. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I strained my ears, and there it was, a deep, growling breath, accompanied by the heavy thud of slow, deliberate footsteps across the wooden porch. It didn't sound like a bear, but it was something large, something powerful. The growling wasn't loud, but it was guttural and resonant, as if the very air around us was vibrating with it. Terrified, we woke our friends who were staying in another room, and together we turned on every light we could, peering outside into the inky darkness. Yet there was nothing. No footprints on the dusty porch, no disturbance in the soft mud surrounding it. Our friends, sleepy and confused, hadn't heard a thing. They hadn't seen the lights in the sky either. Whatever had happened, it seemed it was meant only for us. The rest of our trip passed without further incident, though we never quite relaxed fully again. But it wasn't over, not entirely. Several weeks after we returned home, we were in the kitchen preparing dinner when my wife gasped and pointed toward the backyard. Perched on the fence, staring directly into the house with unnerving intensity, was an owl. It sat there, unmoving, its gaze fixed upon us. I knew nothing then about the supposed link between owls and alien sightings or abductions. How many people who claim to have experienced contact report seeing owls before or after their encounters didn't know. But I do now. We've never experienced lost time as far as we can tell. No missing hours, no strange scars or dreams. And yet, something about that night, something about the triangle in the sky, feels unfinished. It's as though we glimpsed something we were never meant to see, and maybe, just maybe, something out there noticed us too. Since then, there have been no more owl sightings. No further visitations, at least none that we're aware of. Life has mostly returned to normal. Yet when I find myself under a clear sky at night, I can't help but glance upward, half hoping, half dreading that I might see that frozen triangle again, gliding silently across the heavens. I share this story not because I want to scare anyone, but because I need to tell someone, to put the experience into words, to try and understand it myself, and maybe, just maybe, to find others who have seen what I saw. Because deep down, I know we weren't alone that night. Not then, maybe not even now. Story 2, The Scratching at Laguna Mountain. It was meant to be a simple, peaceful escape. A night of camping with my wife and stepdaughter near Laguna Mountain in California. We found a secluded spot far from the main roads, a hidden route that rarely saw passing cars and never pedestrians. No footsteps outside the tent, no strangers wandering by, just the quiet hush of the wilderness wrapping itself around us. It was the kind of isolation that promised real relaxation. A rare moment where we could leave behind the noise and chaos of daily life. The only soundtrack was supposed to be the wind weaving through the trees and the occasional call of a night creature in the distance. But nature, it seemed, had other plans for us. That night, as darkness settled across the landscape like a heavy, comforting blanket, we set up our tent, tethering it tightly with paracord strips anchored deep into the ground. Inside, we laid out our sleeping bags, stacking our backpacks in one corner, and arranged everything with the casual ritual of seasoned campers. There was a quiet satisfaction in the simplicity of it. As the sky deepened to a velvety black, we sat together by a small crackling fire, roasting marshmallows and telling silly stories, laughing softly under a canopy of stars. The forest around us was alive but subdued, full of the quiet, breathing stillness of nighttime. Squirrels chattered occasionally from the trees, curious about the newcomers, and we could hear the tiny rustling footsteps of nocturnal creatures exploring the fringes of our camp. It was comforting in its predictability, the way the wild world moved and whispered around us, each sound a familiar piece of the natural puzzle. Eventually, full of melted chocolate and sticky marshmallows, we retired to the tent. We snuggled into the sleeping bags, the cool air brushing against the thin fabric walls, and drifted towards sleep, lulled by the gentle sounds of the night. Until the scratching began. It was around midnight when I first heard it, a deliberate rhythmic sound, a slow, careful scraping against the taut paracord strips that secured the tent to the earth. At first I froze, every muscle in my body tensing, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. Critters, I told myself. It must be some small animal, curious about the strange structure that had appeared in their domain. Yet, even in the first moments, something about the sound didn't sit right. It wasn't hurried, the way a raccoon or a squirrel would paw at something. It was slow, methodical, as if whatever it was knew exactly what it was doing. A steady, deliberate scraping that sent a chill sliding down my spine. My wife stirred beside me. She had heard it too. Together we lay still, listening. The scratching continued for a while, moving from one part of the tent to another, but never with the skittering, chaotic energy of a wild animal. It was almost thoughtful, a pattern that suggested intent rather than instinct. Eventually the noise stopped. We waited, holding our breath, straining our ears. The forest around us, so alive only hours before, had gone unnervingly silent. Not a rustle, not a chirp. Even the squirrels, whose scampering we had heard earlier, seemed to have vanished. Today, the minutes stretched endlessly, until at last some measure of normalcy returned. We heard the faint scampering of small feet again, the natural sounds of the night resuming their chorus. We tried to convince ourselves it had been nothing. A curious raccoon, maybe, or the shifting of the tent in the night breeze. But the doubt lingered, like a weight on our chests. At around 2 in the morning, just as we were finally sinking back into uneasy sleep, it happened again. The scratching returned, this time even closer to our heads. We could feel the tension in the fabric, the vibrations from the taut paracord strips reverberating through the floor of the tent and into our bones. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a presence. Heavy, unseen, unexplainable. I dared not move, afraid that any noise or sudden shift might provoke whatever was outside. My wife clutched my arm, her fingers digging into my skin, both of us paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of it all. Again, there were no accompanying footsteps, no sounds of an approach. It was as if the thing had simply materialized outside our tent, moving soundlessly, save for that dreadful, patient scratching. I pressed my ear to the floor of the tent, feeling the vibration thrumming against the earth. Steady and insistent. The forest beyond the thin walls of canvas seemed to hold its breath along with us. When the noise finally ceased, we lay awake for hours, our minds racing with possibilities, none of them comforting. Sleep eluded us. Every creak of the tent, every whisper of wind, setting our nerves on edge. We listened intently for any other sounds, but the scratching did not return. Yet, the unease lingered like a shadow. A third time, faint and fleeting, the sound might have come again, but it was so weak, so ephemeral, that we couldn't be sure. Was it real? Or were our tired minds conjuring phantoms from the dark corners of our fear? It lasted only a few seconds, a whisper of a scratch, and then it was gone. The rest of the night dragged by in slow, anxious increments. Every time we closed our eyes, we snapped them open again at the slightest noise. Our bodies remained tense, as though braced for something more. By dawn, when the first pale light seeped into the world, we emerged from the tent, bleary-eyed and exhausted. The forest around us looked unchanged, peaceful, even welcoming. Birds chirped in the distance, and the wind stirred the trees in a way that felt almost friendly. It was almost enough to make us doubt ourselves. Almost. We inspected the tent carefully. The paracord strips showed no signs of tampering, no claw marks, no broken strands. The ground around the tent bore no unusual footprints, no signs that anything had approached in the night. Nothing, except the lingering weight of fear in our chests. We packed up camp quickly, neither of us speaking much. It wasn't until we were back on the main road, civilization creeping into view, that we finally allowed ourselves to breathe a little easier. Later, sitting safely in our living room, we tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it had been a deer brushing against the tent. Maybe the tension in the paracord caused it to snap and creak in the night air. Maybe the isolation and the darkness had played tricks on our senses. Maybe, but deep down neither of us believed it. There was something in the way the forest had gone silent, in the deliberate, rhythmic scratching, in the absence of all other sounds, in the way the air itself had seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Something had come to our tent that night, and whatever it was, it hadn't come out of curiosity. It had moved with purpose. It had watched. It had waited. And even now, in the quiet moments just before sleep, when the world dims and the shadows stretch longer across the walls, I sometimes hear the faintest echo of that scratching, a whisper at the edge of memory, a reminder that not everything in the wild is as harmless as it seems, that sometimes, when you think you're alone, something unseen is watching, just beyond the thin veil of the known world, waiting, listening, and maybe, just maybe scratching softly at the walls of your reality, hoping to be let in. Story 3. The strange friendship with Sarah. When I look back now, it's difficult to understand how easily it all began. I was only 9 years old at the time, growing up in a modest town in the UK, in a small cramped house where the walls were too thin and the dreams even thinner. At school, I had always struggled to make friends. I was the quiet one, the one who faded into the background while others laughed and played, desperate for any connection outside the cold walls of my family home. And so when Sarah appeared, it felt almost like magic. She lived just a street away, and somehow we fell into step with each other as if it was meant to be. Sarah was different from the other girls. She had a wildness to her, a confidence that made her seem older than her years. She was magnetic, and in those early days, I was pulled into her orbit so easily. I remember the excitement of sleepovers at her house, how it felt like escaping into a different world, one filled with strange adventures and secret conversations whispered under the covers. Her home was different too. It was just her and her mother, and they were often alone. Her mum worked weekends, so the house was ours for long stretches of time, unchaperoned and free. It should have felt like liberation. Instead, there was an odd current running beneath it all, something that prickled at the back of my mind, even if I was too young to name it. Sarah would show me things, strange things. Her mother's old magazines filled with imagery I didn't understand, images of vampires and dark swirling worlds that seemed almost hypnotic. She would laugh and make strange comments, nudging me with questions I didn't know how to answer. She made me touch things, hold things I didn't want to, and even though my stomach would twist with unease, I said nothing. I was a nervous child, painfully aware of how rare friendship was for me, and I clung to it tightly, even when it unsettled me. At night, she would whisper strange songs into my ear as I slept, singing patty cake in a high, eerie baby voice that made my skin crawl. Her dolls would come alive, she claimed, angry that I was stealing her attention. She made up stories about them punishing me, and I would lie there stiffly, heart-pounding, unsure whether to believe her or not. My dreams, once simple and unremarkable, became vivid and troubling. My mother noticed the change, how I would wake up gasping, crying out in my sleep. But even then, I didn't pull away from Sarah. I was too afraid of being alone again. Life went on the way it does when you're a child and you don't know how to step off the path you're on. Then, later that year, everything changed. It happened so quickly, it felt like a whirlwind. I was attacked by a dog, a large Japanese Akita, and the damage was brutal. I needed reconstructive surgery on my face, and the trauma of the attack left deep invisible wounds as well as visible ones. Afterward, I had to follow strict routines at school, taking medication, visiting the office every day, and one of my other friends, Lauren, was assigned to help me. She would escort me, take care of me in small ways that Sarah never had. Naturally, Lauren and I grew closer, and Sarah didn't like that. I saw the shift in her immediately. What had once been passive-aggressive jokes turned into sharp, biting comments. She was furious that I was getting attention, that my scar drew pity and kindness from others. One day, out of nowhere, Sarah told everyone that I was pregnant. At 10 years old. The memory of it still stings. The way the other kids looked at me, confused and curious. How even Ellen, one of our friends, believed it enough to tell her own mother. How easily rumours grow when you're too young to question them. Sarah wept, spun elaborate stories about our friendship, played the victim with the kind of conviction that only a deeply wounded child could muster. When that didn't get her what she wanted, she changed tactics. She told everyone she had cancer. I challenged her. Finally, my aunt was battling cancer at the time, and I knew enough to see the holes in Sarah's stories. But Sarah hated to be questioned. After that, she turned on me fully, stealing my belongings, whispering lies about me, turning our small group of friends into a battle group where allegiance was tested daily. Yet even amid the cruelty, I didn't fully break away. Not yet. The final blow came quietly. I had stayed over at Lauren's house one night, and when I woke up, my brand new pink flip phone, the first real phone I'd ever owned, was gone. So was my DS Lite, my most treasured possession. Weeks later, they turned up, smashed to pieces and found, abandoned on a road far from where either of us lived. It was a message, though at the time I was too naive to see it that clearly. Still, I clung to the hope that Sarah could change. We went swimming once for Lauren's birthday, and for a brief moment, it felt like the old days, laughing, playing, pretending we had not grown poisonous to each other. I couldn't swim, terrified of the water after missing swimming lessons due to chicken pox, but Sarah offered to carry me on her back into the deep end. Grateful and eager to belong again, I accepted without a second thought. At first it was fun. Then she started to tilt me sideways, laughing as I begged her to stop, panic rising in my chest. She dunked me, hard, under the water. I thrashed and struggled, unable to breathe, certain I was drowning. It was a lifeguard who eventually pulled me out, not Sarah. I emerged, coughing and crying, while she stood nearby, smiling and saying it was just a joke. That was the day something in me broke. I stopped trying to fix what was broken between us. I withdrew, quietly, choosing loneliness over cruelty. Sarah still found ways to hurt me, spreading rumours, picking fights, but I no longer played along. I survived the final months of primary school by holding on to the simple truth that soon it would be over. In secondary school, a natural barrier formed. The school sorted us into classes by ability, and I ended up in the top class with Lauren and Ellen, while Sarah did not. It was the separation I needed, the invisible wall that kept her at bay. New friends entered my life, kind ones, normal ones. For a while, I forgot about Sarah, until the day she ambushed me outside the corner shop. I remember it so vividly, the shock of seeing her there, blocking the sidewalk, her school tie wrapped bizarrely around her head like a headband. She was crying, but there was a wildness in her that frightened me more than her tears. I tried to walk around her, but she lunged, clawing at my neck, punching and elbowing me. I had never fought anyone before, and didn't know what to do. In desperation, I grabbed her tie and yanked as hard as I could, pulling her to the ground. She scrambled up and ran away, leaving me shaken and confused. I didn't know it then, but it wasn't over. A few months later, just after my 12th birthday, I learned that Sarah had brought a knife to school. She had told people she brought it for me. The police were called. She was expelled immediately. I never saw the knife, but the thought of it haunted me. What might have happened if someone hadn't spoken up? If someone hadn't warned the teachers? Time passed. We all moved on. or at least tried to. I rarely thought about Sarah after that, until one day, years later, when a notification lit up my phone. She had tagged me in an old primary school photo on Facebook, even though we hadn't spoken in years. I ignored it. Then, not long after, she messaged me, inviting me to her birthday party. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say to someone who had once tried to ruin me. She reappeared again once, when I was 19, walking down the street with my boyfriend. She stood at a bus stop, and when our eyes met, she grinned and pulled out her phone, filming me as I walked past. I didn't look back. I just kept walking, heart pounding, filled with a dread I couldn't explain. I have no idea why she did what she did. Maybe she was broken long before I met her. Maybe she was looking for connection the only way she knew how. Maybe she was just angry at a world that had never been kind to her. And maybe sometimes people are just drawn to darkness. Whatever the reason, she left a mark on my life, a scar invisible to anyone but me. Even now, all these years later, I find myself wary of new friendships, cautious around kindness that comes too quickly. I trust slower. I guard my heart more carefully. And when I walk home at night and the street lights flicker overhead, I sometimes wonder if she's still out there somewhere, watching. But mostly, I just hope I never see her again. The story falls. The Amber Alert and the memory of almost being kidnapped happened the other night, quite by accident as I was helping my daughter clean her room. We were laughing together, folding tiny socks, picking up scattered toys, the normal rhythm of life pulsing quietly around us. Then it happened, the loud, shrill beeping of an Amber Alert vibrating through my phone, shattering a moment's peace like a stone through glass. My daughter stopped what she was doing and turned to me, wide-eyed. Asking what that noise was all about, I explained as simply as I could, telling her that when a child goes missing, an alarm is sent to everyone's phones to help find them. I tried to keep my voice calm, steady, not wanting to scare her more than necessary. She nodded solemnly, returning to her task. But inside, something had stirred awake, a long-buried memory hidden deep in the corridors of my mind, a memory that had never really gone away, only dulled over the years. It floated up now, unbidden, refusing to be ignored. I hadn't thought about that day in years, but now it was here again, vivid as a lightning strike, demanding to be remembered. I was around 7 or 8 years old at the time, a scrawny little kid growing up in a small rural town where everyone knew everyone else. Our town was safe, or so it seemed. The kind of place where you could ride your bike until the sun dipped below the hills, where neighbours waved as you passed, and where the idea of something dark, something evil lurking in the shadows seemed impossible. My parents would sometimes drive to a nearby city about 45 minutes away for shopping trips. Our town didn't have much. A small grocery store, a gas station, a few sleepy streets. But the city had everything, restaurants, malls, toy stores. It was exciting, vibrant, a world away from the slow heartbeat of our little town. We made these trips every so often, piling into the family car, my dad grumbling about traffic while my mum made a list of errands. That day we went to a large craft store, Joanne Fabrics, I remember. To me it was enormous, a maze of colours and textures and strange, wonderful things. My dad didn't much care for craft stores, and as usual he stayed behind in the car while my mum and I ventured inside. I can still feel the way my small hand slipped into hers as we crossed the parking lot, the way the automatic doors whooshed open, letting the cool, conditioned air wash over us. Inside, the store was a wonderland of endless aisles. There were shelves bursting with buttons, walls lined with every shade of yarn, and rows of fabric vaults towering over me like a forest. My mum headed toward the fabric section, and I trailed behind, my fingers brushing against the different textures, silk, cotton, velvet, feeling like tiny treasures under my touch. At some point, distracted by the colours and patterns, I drifted a little too far, not far enough to lose sight of my mum, but far enough that the distance between us felt bigger than it should have. I could see her a few aisles away, flipping through bolts of cloth, lost in her search. It didn't seem dangerous. It didn't seem unusual. And then, he was there. The man seemed to materialize out of nowhere, standing just beyond the fabric rack across from me. I hadn't heard him approach. I hadn't seen him coming. One moment, I was alone, and the next, he was there, smiling. There was something off about him, though at the time, I didn't have the words to explain it. A wrongness that prickled at my skin, even before he opened his mouth. "Hey there, little guy," he said, his voice smooth but strange, like syrup poured over broken glass. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. He looked around quickly, glancing over his shoulder, then leaned in closer. "Where's your mum? Are you all alone?" My mouth went dry. I couldn't answer. I just stood there, rooted to the spot, staring at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Come here," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I've got something to show you." He started to move around the rack toward me. Instinct kicked in. I backed away, trying to put distance between us, but he mirrored my movements, blocking me, cutting off my retreat. It was a twisted little dance, a silent, desperate ballet around the circular rack of fabric. Panic surged through me. My tiny body was no match for his, but I had one weapon, my voice. Summoning all the courage I had, I screamed, "Mom! Help!" The sound tore through the store like a siren. Heads turned. My mother's face appeared instantly, her expression shifting from confusion to horror in a heartbeat. She rushed toward me, weaving between the racks, her purse swinging wildly from her shoulder. The man's demeanor changed in an instant. He straightened up, chuckling awkwardly, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "Sorry, man, just playing around. Didn't mean any harm," he said, his voice suddenly oily with false charm. My mother didn't waste a second. She grabbed my hand and pulled me close, placing herself firmly between me and the man. He tipped his imaginary hat to her, gave a tight, uncomfortable smile, and walked briskly out of the store. We left too, abandoning the cart full of fabric, my mother's hand clamped tightly around mine the whole way back to the car. I remember climbing into the back seat, trembling, feeling safer only once the locks clicked shut. Later, at home, my parents talked about it in hushed voices when they thought I couldn't hear. Words like lucky and close call floated through the walls. I didn't understand all of it, not then, but I knew enough to realize that something very bad had almost happened. For years after that day, I would replay the scene in my mind, the man's face, the way he had moved, the terrible wrongness of it. I wondered what might have happened if I hadn't screamed, if my mum had been a few seconds later, if the store had been a little emptier. And now, standing in my daughter's room, folding tiny socks, the Amber Alert buzzing against my hand, I realized how easily it could happen, how quickly a moment could tilt from safe to dangerous without warning. I looked at my daughter, so small, so trusting, and felt a wave of fierce protectiveness wash over me. I told her gently about the importance of staying close, of yelling if something felt wrong, of trusting her instincts, even when her mind tried to explain things away. Julie nodded. She listened, nodding solemnly, taking it all in with the serious attention only a child can give to things they don't fully understand but know are important. That night, after she had gone to bed, I sat alone in the quiet, thinking about the past, about how many near misses there must be in the world, how many silent victories that no one ever knows about, the times a scream is enough, the times a mother looks up just in time, the countless invisible battles fought and won without fanfare. The memory of that man in the fabric store has never truly faded. It lurks in the corners of my mind, a permanent shadow, a reminder that even in the most ordinary places, darkness can reach out its hand, and sometimes All that stands between you and disaster is the simple, powerful sound of a child's voice crying out for help. The story 5. The shadow in sleep paralysis. It started during a time in my life when everything felt uncertain, yet I had no idea how deeply that uncertainty would seep into my nights. I was freshly out of high school, just 18 years old, living with my grandmother in a quiet house nestled among aging oak trees. It was a simple place, a safe place, or so I believed. I had heard of sleep paralysis before, maybe in passing, in some whispered conversation or fleeting mention on television, but I had never experienced it myself. Not until that night. The evening had been uneventful. I had gone to bed early, exhausted from a long day of helping my grandmother with chores. I remember turning off the lights, letting the darkness fold around me like a familiar blanket, feeling the heavy silence of the house settle in. The door was closed. The window was slightly open, letting in the cool night air, thick with the scent of damp earth and distant rain. I must have drifted off quickly, because the next thing I knew something was wrong, terribly wrong. My body felt heavy, heavier than it had ever felt before. The crushing sensation pinned me to the bed, squeezing the breath from my lungs. My limbs were unresponsive, paralyzed, as if they no longer belonged to me. Panic clawed at my chest. I struggled to scream, to cry out for help, but my mouth wouldn't move. I was trapped in my own body, a prisoner behind my own eyes. That was when I saw it. The door to my room, which I knew I had closed tightly, now stood slightly ajar. Through the thin sliver of darkness, something entered. A figure, blacker than black, a silhouette so dark it seemed to absorb the faint light in the room. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, gliding rather than walking. It wasn't a person, not exactly. It had the shape of a person, but none of the details, no face, no eyes, just a void wrapped in the outline of a man. But the head, that was the strangest part. Where the head should have been, there was something different. A swirling, shifting static, like the screen of an old television tuned to nowhere. Black and white noise rippled across where its face should have been, dancing and flickering in an eerie, hypnotic way. It came closer, slowly, unhurried, as if it had all the time in the world. I lay there, helpless, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it beating against the mattress. It stood at the foot of my bed, and for what felt like forever, it simply watched. The static where its face should have been hummed softly, almost like a low mechanical purr. I tried to will myself to move, to scream, to do anything, but the harder I struggled, the heavier the paralysis became. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. It didn't fade away or retreat. It simply ceased to exist, like a light switched off in an empty room. In the next moment, my body released me. I shot upright, gasping for air, my skin clammy with sweat. The room looked the same as it always had, familiar, quiet, harmless. But I knew what I had seen. I knew it had been real. Terrified and desperate for answers, I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and typed in a clumsy search. Can't move while sleeping, see dark figure. The results flooded in. Sleep paralysis, shadow people. It was all there, my experience laid out by countless others who had lived this same nightmare. I wasn't alone, and yet, knowing that did little to comfort me. For days after, I struggled to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I feared that I would find myself frozen again, trapped and vulnerable. Nights stretched long and sleepless, filled with the buzz of anxiety and the lingering memory of static flickering in the dark. Weeks passed. I convinced myself it had been a one-time thing, a strange anomaly caused by stress or exhaustion. Life pressed forward, as it always does, and little by little, the edges of that terrifying memory began to blur, until it happened again. This time, I was visiting my siblings, staying at my mother's house. I was lying on a queen bed in a room shared with my younger brother, who was playing on his PlayStation, sitting cross-legged on a twin mattress placed beside mine. The glow of the television cast soft, flickering light across the room, and the low hum of the game filled the air with a comforting normalcy. I must have dozed off without realizing it, because once again that dreadful sensation returned. Heaviness, paralysis, awareness trapped inside an unmoving body. I could see my brother clearly, still immersed in his game, oblivious to my silent struggle. I tried to call out to him, to scream his name, but no sound escaped my lips. It was as if an invisible hand was clamped tightly over my mouth. And then they came. One by one, 4 figures materialized in the doorway. Like the first, they were pitch black, their forms human-shaped, but devoid of any features. No faces, no eyes, no expressions. Just towering silhouettes, darker than anything around them. They glided into the room silent as smoke. They moved slowly, deliberately, gathering around the bed where I lay. I could feel their presence pressing down on me, a suffocating blanket of unseen weight. They stood there for what felt like an eternity, mere inches from my face, their bodies towering over me. I could see them so clearly, even though no light touched their forms. Their darkness was complete, absolute, a void that swallowed the air itself. And then they spoke. The voice was like nothing I had ever heard before. It wasn't coming from any one of them. It was coming from everywhere at once. It filled the room, filled my head, vibrating through my very bones. Deep, resonant, and the scene cannot be unseen. The words boomed inside me, leaving a deep echoing terror in their wake. And then they were gone. I sat up in bed, gasping, my chest heaving as if I had run a marathon. My brother looked up from his game, startled by my sudden movement, asking if I was okay. I couldn't answer right away. My hands were trembling. My skin was ice cold. That night, I didn't sleep again. I haven't seen the shadow people since then, at least not like that. Not in such a vivid, terrifying way. But the fear remains. A cold knot deep inside me, coiled and waiting. Every night when I lay down to sleep, I wonder if they'll return. If I'll wake to find them standing over me again, whispering truths I'm not meant to understand. I still don't know what they meant by the seen cannot be unseen. Was it about them? About something I glimpsed during that frozen moment between worlds? I may never know. What I do know is that there are things that move through the shadows, slipping between sleep and waking, waiting for the moments when our bodies are still but our minds are wide open. And sometimes, when the world is dark and silent, they find a way in. Story 6. Dreams of my father after his passing. Loss has a strange way of settling into the corners of your life. It's not the loud, devastating moment you might expect, not after time has passed. It's softer, quieter, like a shadow stretching across familiar places. After my father died in 2021, that shadow seemed to follow me everywhere, touching the edges of every moment, even when I tried not to see it. He had fought so hard for so long, battling pulmonary fibrosis, a brutal scarring of the lungs that made every breath a battle. 5 years he fought, enduring endless hospital visits, oxygen tanks, and the heavy silence that came from knowing the odds were against him. In the end, it wasn't even the disease itself that took him. It was a bout of bronchitis during the height of COVID, a simple, devastating final blow that his body couldn't withstand. He was 56 years old when he passed, far too young. There was so much life still ahead of him, so many moments that would now never be. Afterward, in the strange stillness of grief, there was a part of me that couldn't fully accept it, a part of me that kept waiting to hear his cough from the next room, to hear his voice calling out for something simple, something ordinary, and first dream was gentle. I remember it so vividly, more memory than dream. I was standing in the living room of my childhood home. The same faded couch, the same humming refrigerator in the kitchen, the same familiar smell of wood and old carpet. There, lying on his bed in the corner of the living room, was my father. He looked different, younger somehow, like he had stepped out of an old photograph. His face was relaxed, peaceful, and he was smiling. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply gave me a thumbs up, a simple gesture that carried a lifetime of meaning. You're okay. I'm okay. Everything's going to be all right. In the dream, I felt tears streaming down my face. I woke to find that I was crying for real, my pillow damp beneath me, my chest heaving with the deep, aching sobs that only come when grief finally finds its voice. My mother heard me and rushed into the room, holding me as I struggled to catch my breath. I didn't tell her what I'd seen right away. It felt too sacred, too fragile to speak out loud. For a long time after that night, I didn't dream of him again. I started to believe that maybe that was all he had needed to say. One last moment, one last goodbye. I tried to move forward, tried to find my footing again in a world that felt fundamentally different without him. A year passed. Slowly life began to fill in the spaces that grief had hollowed out. And then, just when I least expected it, he returned. This dream was different. In it, I was back in the living room, but something was wrong. The air was heavy, thick with something I couldn't name. My father was there, sitting in his favourite recliner, the old lazy boy he had practically lived in during his last years. The oxygen tank hissing quietly beside him. But he wasn't the young, vibrant man I had seen before. He was sick again, frail and struggling, rocking back and forth as he coughed. A deep, wet rattle that seemed to shake his entire body. I stepped closer, a knot of fear tightening my stomach. The closer I got, the worse the coughing became. It grew louder, more violent, until it no longer sounded like coughing at all. It twisted into something else, something dark and unnatural, an evil, echoing laugh that filled the room, bouncing off the walls, wrapping itself around me like cold hands. Panic rose in my chest. This wasn't my father. This wasn't the man I knew. He still draws away, strongly denying my shout in the dream. I shouted, "You're not my dad." The words tore from my throat, desperate and afraid. I tried to run, to wake up, but I couldn't move. I realized then that I was trapped, caught in the vice grip of sleep paralysis. My mind screamed for my body to respond, but it refused. Locked in place by invisible chains, I could feel the presence in the room growing stronger, heavier. The laughter swirled around me, cruel and mocking. At the same time, something else happened, something strange. My mother, who had been asleep beside me in the real world, later told me that she had felt someone climbing onto the bed at the exact moment I was trapped in that dream. She felt the mattress dip under the weight of something unseen, pressing down near my legs, though there was nothing visible. The experience terrified her so deeply that she shook me awake, breaking the paralysis, pulling me free from whatever held me captive. When I opened my eyes, I could still feel the echoes of the dream clinging to me, the sound of that twisted laughter, the weight of the unseen force. We sat there together, my mother and I, wrapped in silence, both shaken in ways we couldn't explain. We didn't say much that night. Some things are too big for words. Afterwards, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why had the first dream been so peaceful, so full of love and quiet reassurance, while the second was filled with darkness and fear? Was it truly my father visiting me that first time, or something else pretending to be him the second? Was it grief reshaping itself into nightmares? Or had I glimpsed something deeper, something hidden just beyond the veil of the world we think we know? I don't have answers. Even now, years later, I'm still searching. Some nights, When the house is still and the darkness presses against the windows, I wonder if he'll visit me again. I wonder if the dreams will return, and if they do, whether they'll bring comfort or terror. I wonder if he's watching, somewhere beyond the stars, smiling still, or if some darker echo lingers, waiting to slip through the cracks in my sleep once more. But I hold on to that first dream, the memory of his smile, the simple thumbs up. That was real. I know it was. I felt it in my bones, in the marrow of my heart. It was my father, reaching out across the impossible distance, telling me that love endures, even when everything else falls away. And sometimes, when I look up at the night sky, when the stars are scattered like diamonds across an endless canvas, I like to believe that he's out there, somewhere, watching, waiting, proud, telling me, still, in the simplest of ways, that everything's going to be all. Story 7. The Creature in the Dominican Republic Rental House. Memory's a strange thing. Sometimes it fades, blurring the edges of events until they seem almost like stories you were told rather than things you lived. Other times it sharpens certain moments so clearly that you could swear they happened just yesterday, no matter how many years have passed. This is one of those memories for me. Single, vivid moment from a family vacation so long ago that it feels like another life. I was just a child then, maybe 6 or 7 years old, when my family traveled to the Dominican Republic for spring break. We stayed in Santo Domingo, renting a large, airy house close to the ocean. I remember how the air smelled, salt and heat and something sweet drifting from the tropical flowers that framed every pathway. I remember how alive everything seemed, from the bright bursts of colour in the marketplace to the endless, lazy ripple of the waves against the shore. The trip itself was wonderful, filled with long days of exploration and laughter. But for all the joy and adventure we experienced, there is only one moment that remains crystal clear in my mind. Only one moment that has haunted me, quietly, ever since. It happened one afternoon, during a lull between our beach excursions and sightseeing tours. The rental house was beautiful, but old, full of strange creaks and shadows that seemed deeper and darker than they ought to be. My parents were in their room napping, and I was left to entertain myself for a while. I wandered through the house, feeling the cool tile under my bare feet, humming softly to myself. At some point, I needed to change into my swimsuit. I remember crossing the living room, the sunlight slanting through the windows, making everything look golden and still. Our rental house had an indoor balcony that overlooked a small garden courtyard, and the double doors leading to it were propped open, letting the warm breeze curl lazily inside. As I was walking back from the bedroom, swimsuit in hand, when I saw it. In the gap between the open double doors, something moved. It happened so quickly, barely a second, but in that moment I knew I had seen something that should not have been there. A creature, small but not tiny, darted across the open space. It was about 3 or 4 feet tall, covered in short white hair that almost shimmered in the sunlight. It moved on 2 legs, but its posture was hunched, its arms swinging slightly as it loped across the gap. Its arms and hands were eerily human, with long fingers that curled slightly as it moved. Its legs, though, were wrong. They bent backward at the knee like an animal's hind legs, giving it a strange, otherworldly gait. And its face, God, its face was the strangest part of all. It had a protruding snout, somewhere between a nose and a mouth, like nothing I had ever seen before or since. It was there, and then it was gone. I stood frozen, staring at the empty space it had crossed, my swimsuit forgotten in my hand. My heart pounded against my ribs, my mouth dry. I wanted to run after it, to see where it had gone, but fear rooted me to the spot. I was just a kid, too young to trust my own instincts, too old to pretend it was nothing. Instead, I ran back to my parents, crawling onto the bed between them, feeling safer just by being near them. I didn't tell them right away. I wasn't sure they would believe me. I wasn't even sure I believed myself. But the memory stuck, It grew roots in my mind, burrowing deep into the fertile soil of childhood fear and wonder. I thought about it constantly after we returned home. I drew pictures of the creature over and over again, trying to capture its image before it faded away. Sometimes I made it look scarier, sometimes friendlier, but no matter how many times I sketched it, the core of what I saw remained the same. Short white fur, human-like arms and hands, animal legs, a strange, protruding snout. I searched for answers as I grew older. I combed through books on cryptids, strange creatures, folklore. I asked questions in forums, read articles about sightings of mysterious animals, but nothing matched exactly. It wasn't a classic werewolf or a chupacabra or any of the well-known monsters whispered about in the dark corners of the internet, but it was something else. Even now, all these years later, I can still see it in my mind's eye. I can still feel the sharp jolt of fear and awe that shot through me when I glimpsed it. I wonder sometimes if it was real, if I truly saw it with my waking eyes, or if it was some strange flicker of imagination, sparked by the magic of being a child in a foreign, ancient place. But deep down, I know it was real, because dreams, no matter how vivid, do not cast shadows. And I remember this shadow, the brief, flickering darkness that moved across the sunlit floor as the creature passed. I never saw it again. The rest of the trip passed uneventfully, full of the usual noise and bustle of a family vacation. And when we left the Dominican Republic, I left behind the house, the courtyard, and the strange creature that had crossed my path for just a heartbeat of time. But I carried the memory with me. Sometimes I wonder what it was. Some undiscovered species, a being from another world, slipping through a crack in reality. A guardian spirit, perhaps? Or something much older, much stranger, that we aren't meant to understand? Or maybe it was something even simpler. A reminder that the world is far bigger, far wilder than we like to believe. We tell ourselves that we know what's out there, that we have mapped the wilderness, named every species, explained every mystery. But sometimes, when the conditions are just right, when the sun slants through the windows just so, when the breeze stirs the air and the world holds its breath, something steps through the veil, something unknown, something unforgettable. And for a brief, shimmering moment, we are reminded that the world is not as small as we think. I don't know if I'll ever have another encounter like that. Part of me hopes I will, that I'll glimpse another fleeting mystery just beyond the edge of understanding. Part of me, though, is content to let the memory remain exactly as it is, pure, unexplainable, and untouched by anything so mundane as certainty. After all, some stories are meant to remain mysteries. Some truths are too wild to be caged. And some memories, no matter how much time passes, refuse to fade. In 8, The Mansion and the Shadows. I was 12 years old when my family moved into the mansion on the edge of town. It sounds like something out of a fairy tale, but it was far from magical. The house was old, massive, built sometime in the early 900s, with creaking floorboards, towering ceilings, and windows so tall they seemed to scrape the sky. It was the kind of place that carried its history in every corner, every faded wallpapered wall, every groaning stair. My parents were thrilled to own such a grand old home at a price that seemed almost too good to be true. To me, it felt like stepping into someone else's forgotten life. From the very beginning, there was something strange about the place. Not just the ordinary unsettling feeling we get from an old house with too many rooms and too many shadows. This was something deeper, something alive. I first noticed it at night, after the house settled into silence and the world outside dimmed into darkness. The air would change. It grew heavier somehow, thicker. Sounds seemed to carry differently, as if the walls were breathing, whispering secrets just beyond the edge of hearing. I would lie awake in my room staring up at the ornate ceiling, trying to tell myself it was all in my imagination. But then came the footsteps, soft at first, so faint I thought I was dreaming. A slow, deliberate creak across the floorboards just outside my bedroom door. I would hold my breath, heart hammering in my chest, listening as the steps moved down the hall, paused outside my door, then continued on. I told myself it was the house settling, old wood and nails shifting with the cool night air. That was what my father said whenever I worked up the courage to mention it. "It's just the house talking," he would say, ruffling my hair with a smile. But I knew better. Houses don't stop to linger at your door. And it wasn't just the footsteps. Sometimes, when I was alone in the big echoing living room, I would catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. A shadow darting across the far wall, a figure slipping through a doorway just as I turned my head, always too quick to see clearly, always gone when I tried to follow. The feeling of being watched became a constant companion. No matter where I went in that house, no matter what time of day, I could feel unseen eyes following me, watching, waiting. My parents were oblivious. They were busy renovating, stripping old wallpaper, refinishing floors, turning the house into a dream home. They didn't see the shadows. They didn't hear the whispers. They didn't feel the cold spots that would suddenly bloom in the middle of a sunlit room, freezing the air around them. They stopped talking about it after a while. I didn't want to sound crazy. I didn't want to be brushed off again. Then came the night I saw it fully. It was late, well past midnight. I had woken from a restless sleep, thirsty and disoriented. I stumbled out of bed, making my way down the long, dark hallway toward the kitchen. As I passed the grand staircase that led up to the attic, something caught my eye. A figure stood at the top of the stairs. At first I thought it was my mother. The figure was roughly the right height, wearing a long flowing gown that could have been mistaken for a nightgown in the dim light. Relief flooded me. I wasn't alone, but as I watched, that relief curdled into dread. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe. It simply stood there, utterly still, its face lost in shadow, and then, slowly, it began to drift down the stairs. Not walk, but float, gliding silently toward me. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. I just stood there, frozen, as the figure descended, closer and closer. When it reached the bottom step, it simply vanished. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, leaving only the faint scent of something old and dusty in the air. I didn't sleep that night. I curled up in a chair in the corner of my room, every light blazing, waiting for the morning. The next day, I begged my parents to let us move. I told them everything. The footsteps, the shadows, the figure on the stairs. They listened with patient smiles, then reassured me it was just a bad dream, a trick of the mind. "You have an active imagination," my mother said. "It's normal in a new house." But it wasn't just me. One afternoon a few weeks later, my best friend Katie came over to visit. We were playing hide and seek, running through the endless maze of rooms, laughing and shouting. She was hiding, and I was counting, in the grand hallway by the front door. When I finished counting and called out, I heard her giggle from somewhere upstairs. I raced up the steps, following the sound. I turned the corner into the long hallway and stopped. Katie was standing at the far end, peeking around a doorframe. She smiled and waved at me, then slipped out of sight into the room beyond. I grinned and gave chase, sprinting down the hall. I burst into the room, expecting to find her hiding behind the old wardrobe or crouched behind the faded armchair. But the room was empty, completely, utterly empty. Confused, I checked the closet, the adjoining bathroom. Nothing. I called out for her and she answered from downstairs. I found her sitting in the living room flipping through a magazine, looking completely relaxed. She swore she hadn't been upstairs at all. She'd been waiting for me to come find her. I didn't tell her what I had seen. I didn't want to scare her, but I knew it wasn't Katie I had seen at the end of that hallway. I knew it was something else, something that could wear our faces. After that, I avoided being alone in the house whenever I could. I spent as much time outside as possible, wandering the overgrown gardens, sitting under the twisted old trees, listening to the wind. The house itself seemed to resent my absence, groaning and creaking louder when I returned. The shadows growing longer and darker. I made it through that year somehow. I grew used to the strange, heavy feeling of being watched. I learned to ignore the footsteps, the flickering glimpses of movement just beyond sight. I pretended not to hear my name whispered softly in the dead of night. Eventually, life pulled us away. My father's job changed and we moved to a different town, leaving the mansion behind. I didn't look back. Years later, as an adult, I sometimes dream about that house. The dreams are always the same. The endless hallways, the towering staircase, the feeling of being followed. I wake with my heart racing, the taste of fear sharp on my tongue. Sometimes I wonder what we stirred up in that house, what old spirits we disturbed with our renovations and bright new furniture. What memories we awakened that had been sleeping peacefully until we arrived. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the shadows stretch long across my bedroom walls, I feel it again, that old, familiar sensation, the sense that something is watching me from just beyond the door, waiting.